Friends, it's always a pleasure to have with me on Liberty Dispatch interview friend of the show, Tim Stevens. Tim is the pastor of Fairview Baptist Church in Calgary, Alberta. He started his ministry in January 2014. Tim grew up on a farm in Eastern Ontario and graduated with a computer engineering degree from Queen's University and a Master's of Divinity degree from Detroit Baptist Theological Seminary. Tim has completed quite recently a Doctor of Ministry focused on expository preaching at the Master's Seminary. He is happily married to Raquel, and together they have 9 children. Tim, thanks again for joining me on the Dispatch. It's great to have you.
Yeah, well, thank you, Andrew. Good to be here.
So I wanted to do a little bit of a quick flyover first before we get into why I wanted to have you on the show. A little bit of our present situation. Donald Trump has imposed tariffs on Canada, but kind of on again, off again. They're coming, it's paused, they're coming. Now they're paused until April 2nd. And Canada is poised to respond in kind, at least in Ontario. Our premier has decided he will go right ahead with responding and taking all the Jack Daniels off the shelf for the LCBO. Justin Trudeau has officially resigned. We have a new 24th Prime Minister of Canada, Mark Carney, who has probably even more extreme policies than Justin Trudeau, especially in the climate world and in the spending taxing world. Trump's recent activities, interestingly enough, have seen a surge in liberal support. Kind of the polls are trending where, oh yeah, conservatives going to be a blowout. Well, maybe not so much. There's economic upheaval around us. People are concerned. People are worried. There might be some big changes coming up in Canada. So all of that is going on. And I'm thinking about and reflecting on this article that you wrote recently. I read it the day you released it on your church's website. And in the article, you highlighted the relationship between Alberta and the rest of Canada, primarily central and eastern Canada, Ontario and Quebec, and the potential relationship between Alberta and the United States. And when I read your article, it was the first to come out in what was a series of other similar related articles. Bruce Pardy, who's a constitutional lawyer and Queen's University law professor, was quite explicit in saying, no, Alberta should definitively join the United States because he prefers a republic, of which Canada is not. Dr. David Haskell, who's a friend of mine, wrote an article where he said there's maybe 3 possibilities. One is Trump annexes Canada. 2 is just Alberta joins because of the opportunity given the Clarity Act in 2000. Or the United States basically offers citizenship for vetted conservatives, true conservatives, to flock down there and make America great again. And then there's an Alberta lawyer, Jeffrey Rath, who led a delegation to Washington to have this discussion about possibly having Alberta become the 51st state. So this is all going on in the mix as we see the tariffs in the economic situation. So your article was first. I appreciated what you had to say. I shared it with a bunch of people. We shared it, actually. Dispatch shared it on our social media channels as well, because I thought it was unique in its perspective and its defense of your position. So what were you thinking kind of led you in the writing of the article, and kind of give us a high level, what's the main point, or what is it that you hope to communicate by writing this article, which we'll link to in the description as well for everyone?
Yeah, there's really a lot of factors that go into the article. Obviously, the events that you just mentioned about the tariffs and the relationship between Canada and the United States was the immediate, cause of me penning this article. But it really touched on issues that are longstanding here in the West. As you read in my bio, I grew up in Ontario, but as soon as I finished university, I've been out here in the West. So my entire adult life, and now, most of my life, I've lived out here in Alberta, and really got to know more about the dynamics of East and West and how things function in Canada that I had no idea when I grew up and lived in Ontario. And part of Trump's reason for the tariffs, he's mentioned, security at the border. He's mentioned illegal immigration. He's mentioned fentanyl crisis. And then he's also mentioned it's a bad deal, how the United States has been taken advantage of. And he says it's enough. That shouldn't happen any longer. We shouldn't support Canada. And they always assume we have a strong military to defend them, a strong economy to prop them up. And so essentially what Trump desires, what he's articulated, was a fair deal for the United States in their dealings with Canada. And that really struck a note for me, because that has been the cry of Western Canada for a long time. We just want a fair deal with Central Canada. And if you think about things that have happened over the last several decades with Pierre Trudeau and with his National Energy Board, and then with his son Justin Trudeau, the pipelines that were canceled, bills that would prevent oil tankers from coming on Canada's west coast while still allowing them on the east coast to import Saudi Arabian oil to the eastern part of Canada. There's several different measures, and of course, all the climate change measures have really adversely affect Alberta's main economy of oil and gas and beef, with fertilizers and all of that. So it seems like there's been a concerted attack, at least that's how Albertans would understand it, against our livelihoods, our economy, without any kind of fair deal. And so when Donald Trump says, "Hey, we want a fair deal," people in Alberta say, "Us too." We have grievances with Central Canada, with Ontario and Quebec, and how they hold all the power in our country, and really treat Alberta and the West as a cash cow, and money flows from west to east, but there's not really any reciprocation in terms of trade, or any kind of involvement in the political process. And I can get into some more details about that, but there's certainly here in the West, there's always been a level of separatist sentiment, but that's been ignited with Donald Trump and what he's saying.
It's interesting because most people, probably especially in central and kind of more eastern Canada, maybe don't even know about what a transfer payment is. I'm sure people in Western Canada are much more acquainted with it, but in your article you have that picture of the map of Canada and showing the percentages, and that was helpful, especially for people who have no idea about the rather raw deal that Alberta gets. And even you mentioning the energy sector, it seems so immoral that you would have a province that within itself has natural resources and the ability to create work, to create energy, to create wealth. I mean, all good, bright biblical things. And yet you have the federal government that imposes these green cult restrictions that prohibit a province from actually doing what it should do for the care of its own people, almost like a federal government that tells people you can't go to work and you can't provide for your family because we all have to stay safe. I guess, thinking about moving out to Western Canada, a lot of these discussions about transfer payments, about that, and you alluded to this, this wasn't something I guess you were necessarily thinking of, or certainly something that isn't talked about a whole lot in your time growing up in Ontario. It's certainly the case for me. That's not the kind of where I grew up. So I guess you would say that you were awakened to these realities once you moved out to that part of the country, that up until this point, up until that point, you were a beneficiary, so to speak, in Ontario, of getting all the transfer payments from Western Canada.
That's exactly right. Before I was a pastor, when I came out west, I graduated with a computer engineering degree, and I came out to Calgary to work as a software developer. But out here, the industry is oil and gas. So I worked in the oil and gas industry, writing software, and to realize that this industry generates a lot of wealth, not just for Albertans, but for all Canadians, and cheap energy really allows us as humanity to flourish and prosper in so many different ways. That's really what has given us so many modern advances, is having abundant energy and having it at a cheap cost. And then when you think about how Central Canada has really sought to stand in the way of that industry, so right now Alberta only sells their oil to the United States, and so our biggest customer, and Calgary, their economic livelihoods are tied directly to the United States. So more than 95% of our economy is exports, mostly oil and gas and beef, to the United States. And so obviously that relationship is more important for us in the West than our relationship is with Central Canada, who won't take our oil, who won't take our beef, because they want to protect the beef industry in Ontario and Quebec, and so they won't sell Alberta beef there. So it's things like that. But at the same time, they'll accept transfer payments, and transfer payments, for those who don't know, is these arose whenever Quebec was talking about separation, and it was a way that so-called have provinces would share with have-not provinces so that every Canadian has equal access and equal levels of service. But the way the formula is calculated, um, it's it's not fair to the Western provinces and especially to Alberta. And so Quebec receives more than 13 billion a year from Alberta. Ontario receives half a billion. So the east of Canada receives all this money that comes from the resources that are in Alberta that the east at the same time is trying to thwart and to stop. And so it's frustrating for people here in Western Canada who are generous, who have no issue contributing to Canada, but they just want something that's fair. Example of the unfairness is that while Alberta's oil and gas industry is included in the transfer payments, in the calculations of that, Quebec's energy industry and the hydro industry is not included in that. And so you take some of their main industries that they're not factored in, but Alberta's is. So you always have transfer of wealth from the west to the east, and that's just financially. But of course, the issue is beyond that, in that it's not just coming down to finances, but even coming down to representation in decisions that are made across the country. And so if you look at, there's another map that shows Senate seat distribution across the country. And not all your listeners might know, but our Senate, we don't even vote on our senators, but our senators are appointed by the Prime Minister. And at this point, Trudeau Jr. has appointed 93 of the 105 Senate seats. And so you can tell, the bias is in the Senate right now. But there's supposed to be 6 senators that represent Alberta. Now, these are all very left woke individuals that are supposedly going to represent conservative Alberta. But they have 6 senators representing Alberta. Quebec and Ontario each have 24 each senators. You take some of the smaller provinces like New Brunswick or Nova Scotia, they have 10 senators in the Senate. Or Newfoundland, you have 6 senators. PEI, you have 4 senators. But Alberta is just a bit over half the population of Quebec, but not even close to half the representation in the Senate. It's 5 times the size of Nova Scotia, 5 times the size of New Brunswick, 10 times the size of Newfoundland, and yet these provinces have the same or more representation in the Senate than Alberta does. And so it becomes really difficult when there's no voice. And when the Reform Party started many years ago, that eventually led to the Harper government, all Albertans wanted was an elected Senate, was fair representation and a fair deal with Central Canada, and to have control over our resources, which is the deal under Confederation, that each province would have jurisdiction over their own resources. And it just hasn't worked out that way. And so there are several influential people here in the province who were supportive of the Harper government, who were supportive of what Preston Manning and others had done in the Reform Party, and who now realize that the reforms that were tried through the 80s and in the 90s have failed. And Central Canada, Quebec and Ontario will never give up their power, would never give up all the benefits that they have right now, the way things currently operate. And so that leaves the only legitimate option is for Alberta to say, we're out of here. We want a new deal. And there's some that want an independent country in Alberta. There's others that want Alberta to join the United States. But regardless of the final outcome, I believe Alberta needs to talk about a separation. That needs to happen first. There needs to be some kind of referendum to say, we want a fair deal and we want to leave Canada. And I think when Alberta is serious about that, it might cause folks in Ontario and Quebec to look further into the matter. And then perhaps we as a country can grow in health and in unity together.
Yeah, the abusive husband might think twice about how he treats his wife if she actually decides to leave him. That might be the thing that helps him to smarten up. And I'm glad, Tim, that you've outlined that as clearly as you have for people to understand, because many Christians will speak out against the ills of neo-Marxism and social justice theory when it has to do with DEI initiatives or kind of the individual way that power, privilege, and wealth is redistributed to other people. And yet they won't say anything about, or they won't speak out about, or they're ignorant of what essentially is a social justice kind of system, which is the redistribution of wealth in such a way, and ultimately power to be consolidated to a smaller group that hasn't earned it or worked for it, that there hasn't been meritocratic uh, effort in it, and yet people are silent on that. And I bring that up because at the end of the article you present your justification, and your justification is not primarily economic, it's not primarily sociological, it's where it needs to be, which is grounded in the scriptures. So I want to quote from you leading into that point, and then I want to ask my question about your justification. So you say this quote: "I'm convinced that the time is right to discuss Alberta's independence and bring the United States and central Canada to the bargaining table. It's time to unleash the potential of Alberta rather than extinguish it." Close quote. And so you've outlined your convictions. And then the question I have is, walk us through the biblical support for your convictions, or why it is that thinking this way isn't just anti-authoritarian scofflaw Tim Stevens who's just upset about a raw deal, but rather I'm thinking through the application of the scriptures and how it is that with the right Christian worldview, I can hold this position and have these conversations.
Yeah, there's three biblical arguments that I gave in my article. The first one was the biblical principle of a limited government, and what I meant by that is when you have a government that exercises authority beyond its scope or its breadth, it goes outside of its jurisdiction, and also authority that goes above its jurisdiction and rules in the place of God. Both of those things are wrong to do, and we have a broken system in Canada. We are certainly a socialistic country, and you
Not only
have the power of the country consolidated, into a small elite group who maintains that power, and then rules over the other provinces in a way that is unfair. It's you could use the word tyrannical or totalitarian. It's going beyond its jurisdiction and even beyond its agreements. And so when you think about, even during the time of the Reformation and following the Reformation, there was a lot of work on political theory and understanding that when a king or a monarch or some kind of magistrate and goes above and beyond the laws of the land, it's important for Christians to say, no, that's not right. They're held to the law of God. They're held to the law of the land. And just the idea of this centralized government in central Canada, where you have large portions of the country who do not have a say or a voice in how things are governed, it is not right according to biblical standards of justice. Another recent example of this is in the news right now. People in Canada are all up in arms because of Trump's threatened tariffs against steel and aluminum, and how that is threatening the auto industry, which is predominantly in Ontario. And at the same time, there's been silence on the fact that Canada has recently imposed tariffs on China to prevent Chinese electric vehicles from coming into Canada.
I had to go back and forth with someone on social media about that. So someone posted a picture of China's tariffs that they've recently imposed on Canada, and are we gonna boycott them as well? And I commented slightly saying, well, let's be fair here. Obviously, we don't like what they're doing. However, Canada did impose a 100% surtax on Chinese electric vehicles and a 25% surtax on Chinese steel and aluminum back in October. So we're not innocent. We're not the victims here. We played this game as well. And you're right, to be silent about one and simply say, "Oh, woe is us," it's disingenuous. It's not honest. It's not helpful.
Well, it even gets worse because the Chinese government has retaliated to those tariffs and imposed a 100% tariff on canola oil, which
Hmm.
which only impacts Alberta and Saskatchewan, to
Right.
which there's no response from central Canada or from the media, because that's not going to impact their bottom line. And so it's just unfair treatment across Canada. And so when you have a limited government, it allows provinces, it allows cities that are outside of the immediate jurisdiction of where power is consolidated in Ottawa, and allows them to make decisions that is best for themselves and their own citizens. And so why do you have a government in Ottawa that continually stands in the way of governments here in the West from getting their oil and natural gas to Tidewater? Why can't Alberta be a worldwide supplier of liquid natural gas to Europe, so they don't have to be dependent on Russian gas? So Alberta's not asking for handouts, but Alberta simply desires to access that world market that has continually stood in the way. So uh, government is always better when it's limited, and when you have those people that are immediately affected by those decisions by the government, being the ones that have the responsibility to handle those governments, handle those decisions. So when you have a government who's making all the decisions, but they're not directly accountable or directly responsible, or they're not the ones directly affected, you have a lot of abuse that can happen. So that was my first argument. This is the idea that limited government is a biblical idea. The second principle is related to it, um, that the Bible advocates for a local government. You should not have one father being a father in another household dictating all that should happen in somebody else's household, but you understand that um, someone who's there with their feet on the ground is much better able to make decisions for the people in their area. And there's such a divide between East and West that it really makes it nearly impossible for folks in central Canada to rule in such a way that they're taking to heart interests of people in the West who are not at the table and involved in the government. So there's
Do
a
you? And
biblical principle of
I want
local
to ask this
government.
question because I was thinking about this as you were talking earlier, and I want to get your perspective. Do you think that that's because there is a obviously it doesn't mark everyone, and we would say that generally speaking, you can see in bigger cities and metropolitan cities they tend to lean a certain way. Do you think that our Laurentian elites look at Alberta and think those cowboys, those rednecks, those conservatives, like there's because there is a little more of a conservative independent streak that runs through Alberta than in other provinces. And we could say that both politically, I mean, Danielle Smith, who isn't a traditional conservative, but is certainly more to the right of who you had before her, and who governs in the rest of the country. Do you think that there's a part of a we despise conservatives and we despise traditional values, and those guys and their Calgary Stampede, they don't belong here? Do you think there's some of that undergirds the treatment of why it is that central, other than obviously they want power, they want wealth, they're greedy, they're tyrants, given? Do you think that there's that piece as well socially?
Yeah, I don't think there's some of that. I think there's lots of that. I think there's an air of superiority coming from that, the Laurentian elites or from central Canada who look down on conservatives in general. I think that's why they look down on Americans, look down on Republicans, especially in Donald Trump, and why they're comfortable booing the American national anthem and encouraging that. Like um, what childishness that is seen in our government by encouraging citizens to boo the American anthem at a hockey game. But there's an air of superiority that people in Canada have because we're not American. They're brash, they're proud, they're uncivilized. We're so much better than that, and I think that same attitude is present when you think of East and West and looking towards Alberta. Out in Alberta, you have cowboys, you have a lot of pickup trucks, you have guys working the rigs, oil and gas. So you don't have that same. Um, they don't look at Alberta like, well, here's a bastion of the elites and the globalists, and really the influencers. Um, and so I think there's that attitude is an attitude that's embedded um, in central Canada especially, but it is embedded in Canadian culture, this air of superiority. We're just better than other people,
Hmm.
especially
So
conservatives.
so those are right. Yeah, they're definitely better than us. So those are the first two reasons. What was the third justification or third biblical foundation
Yeah.
for why there should be a
Yeah.
Alberta sits across the table, say, okay, give us your best offer, let's talk.
Yeah. So, the first two related to just what the Bible says about how government should operate. And I believe the American model is much better in that than the Westminster parliamentary system in Canada. But the third one had to do with the biblical principle of loving our neighbor. And this came out big during COVID-19, right? So it wasn't just, so some people thought, during COVID-19 when our church was open, we're just being selfish, like I wanted the restrictions to go away so I can go to the restaurant with my family. It's like, don't peg us as being that self-centered. But this is freedom for our neighbors. This is about our neighbors' livelihoods. So if this tariff war continues and you still have Doug Ford, for instance, huffing and puffing and blustering all these threats and carrying out all these threats, as China and as the U.S. retaliate, that will adversely affect Alberta more than it would any other province. As I mentioned, is how economically tied we are to the United States, because Central Canada refuses to do business with Alberta, even though they profit from Alberta. And so we're so tied to the United States, and so as that relationship sours, that there will be tens of thousands of people here without jobs. There will be great hardships, and we knew those hardships going into COVID, and it turned out to be. And the church had to come in, and there were so many people that we needed to help, and the same is going to happen here. And so, out of love for our neighbor, who are seeking just to get a living and to go to work and not have their businesses shut down, I think it's important that as Christians we stand for our neighbors, and we stand for what is right and what is just, and that's really what's fueling this idea of separatism and independence, is that this injustice towards our neighbors needs to stop, and our neighbors need to be cared for rather than abused in this way.
So Danielle Smith has been quite clear that she both is will never be the 51st state, but at least from some of the stuff I've seen, she at least in little measure seems to support the strong response. The oh well, we need to be strong. We need to maybe tariff as well, which is a little bit disappointing because that's your premier. But so that's her position. What do you think? Obviously, you don't speak on behalf of the province. Um, Given the cities of Calgary and Edmonton, uh, what kind of support do you think? What like is there enough in Alberta that if there were to be some sort of referendum, that there's enough in the province that would actually entertain it? And if so, let's assume that you have enough of the people in the province who would say yes, it's time to leave and renegotiate. Do you think that with that support, that the leaders, the premier, would say, okay, let's, you know what, if this is what the people want, we'll entertain it? Or do you think that either there's not enough support, and or if there were, Danielle Smith would say, no, we're not gonna hold that election? Would again, not being the representative, you're not Mr. Alberta, but what do you think?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think politicians, including Daniel Smith, are really trying to put their thumb on where the people are at before they go and make decisions like that. And there's obviously lots of people here that would be opposed to separation or independence for Alberta, and mostly it's there's an ignorance of history, ignorance of what the deal ought to have been as a province joining Confederation, and it's a sense of just this nostalgia, and we're just Canadian. It's part of who we are, and they can't imagine upsetting the status quo. And of course, there's concerns about what that would mean financially, and all the issues as you try to untangle yourself from the Canadian system. So you have a lot of people who are just uh, happy with the status quo. But at the same time, there's a lot of voices. You mentioned some of the articles that were written. Even Jordan Peterson, writing in the National Post, was talking about it. How you better give a fair deal for Alberta, or else they're going to consider separating. back with the National Energy Board in the 80s, when Pierre Trudeau was, really waging war against the West and our industries out here, separatism and independence was really um, growing at that time, which led to the reform movement with Preston Manning and so forth, and we saw changes among the conservatives at that time. But I think at this point, a lot of those people realize that reform in Canada, whether that's an elected Senate or changes to our parliamentary system, are just not going to happen. Central Canada just won't allow that. And so the slogan of the Reform Party was "The West wants in." I think now the slogan should be the West wants out, because we can't get a fair deal, and so it's time to go out. And there's other movements around here. You think of, there's a former MLA, Drew Barnes. He was supportive of us during COVID, and he's come out recently in support of independence. And so he's been in Edmonton. Edmonton is, our capital here in Alberta, is probably the most left leaning of all the places in Alberta, because it's a place of bureaucracy. But at the same time, support for separatism is growing. There was a recent poll I saw from research company that this was back in, I think, December. So this is even before all the recent tariff skirmishes, and it had people in Alberta who were very much supportive or modestly supportive of Alberta independence, and that survey had 38% of Albertans were in favor of it. That's higher than the separatist sentiment that's in Quebec. And so I think it's real. I think it's growing. There's a website right now, or a group right now, called the Alberta Prosperity Project, and they have talks and info sessions across Alberta, raising support for independence, and they're collecting emails from Albertans to see whether they have enough names then to call a referendum. And so if you have enough people ready to say yes to a vote of independence, they want to know when that is, so that they can have a referendum and make that call. So I think there is growing support. I think one thing that we need right now is just a face of the movement. We need someone who will be a leader, someone who is willing to rally all the disparate groups of people who are liking independence or liking being the 51st state. Someone who can be a figurehead and really bring attention to the issue. I think personally, Jordan Peterson should come back to Alberta. He's born and raised here in Alberta. I think he should come back and be that figurehead to lead Alberta into a time of independence and prosperity. But I'm sure he's got other things to do.
Well, do you think he's going to leave the promised land once he makes his way down there? Do you think he's going to he'll come back to Canada? He might come back and lead us like Bonhoeffer. He'll come back from the United States to Germany and throw his lot in with us. I find it curious that a guy like Jordan Peterson, who up until he ended up in the States, was at the University of Toronto. Bruce Pardy is in Ontario. David Haskell is in Ontario. I find it curious, a number of these, not even necessarily conservative, but let's say even libertarian and conservative people outside of Alberta, it's almost like they want to live vicariously through Alberta, that they look at Ontario and think, we're done here. If Doug Ford's the most conservative we can get, it's bad news. And they look at Alberta and they think, oh, but if they can do it, yay, go Alberta. And then David Haskell has an interesting point that if Alberta were to join the United States, you couldn't have Canadians flock to Alberta, because then they would technically be immigrating to another country. So it'd be also the dream of, once Alberta's free, we'll just run to Alberta. Maybe not. Now you have immigration issues there. I wonder what that would look like. I wonder if you would have conservatives all across Canada saying, well, we don't want to go to the States, but Alberta's kind of one of us, so we'll go there now that they're a part of the United States. And you're not, you're not a prophet. You're not the son of a prophet, though you are a doctor, right? There's a measure of credential trust there. What do you think? I'm not going to hold you to it. We're not going to take bets, but you seem quite certain, and I'm persuaded to agree with you that the current system, the deal that Alberta has, and the control in central Canada probably isn't going anywhere unless or until Canada falls apart as a nation. That's the only way I see it coming to an end, or some sort of dramatic reformation that takes place in however many years that happens. So if that's not going to happen, what do you think that this is a 38% approval rating based on that recent poll? Is this something that could happen within a generation, or is it going to be like Quebec, where it's a constant, oh, we're going to leave. Oh, no, we're staying. Oh, we're going to leave. We're staying. What do you think?
Yeah, well, part of Quebec's "we're going to leave, oh, we're staying" means that they they get a good deal from Ontario because Ontario wants them to stay. And so even if Alberta legitimately threatens separation, that would be better for Canada. And I think that's what like Bruce Party and others are saying is that if Alberta says we're out of here, and that is not just just is a few voices, but that's a majority of the folks in Alberta. Well, suddenly now we have to rethink how Canada is structured, and they want that because it'd be better even if you're living in Ontario and you're conservative in Ontario, and that will be better for you. And so they're arguing for Alberta to rise up and be independent for the sake of the entire country and for the health and the government of the entire country. In terms of whether Alberta would the likelihood of separation, I think right now there's just not quite enough support. However, like I said, if there's a figurehead that might come and help rally support. Also, if Mark Carney wins the next general election, he won't get any votes from Western Canada. But if he wins the next federal election and continues the same course of treating Alberta and others in the West unfairly, that's only going to fuel more and more separation. The better that the United States, if they continue to prosper, and this tariff war doesn't abate, again, that's going to cause a lot of hardships for folks here in the West. And so, a Carney government, a trade war, all these things are going to hurt Western Canadians, and if Western Canadians are hurt enough and desperate enough because they're losing their jobs, they're losing their homes, suddenly they can say, well, yes, let's anything is better than this. Let's leave and let's get a better deal so we can protect our livelihoods and protect our resources. So I would love to see an independent Alberta, but I just know it'll be a lot of hardship before that takes place, which is not what we want. We don't want that for our folks here. But that might be what it takes for that to come about. Now, ideally, you'd have Alberta say, hey, we want out. You have Saskatchewan right beside us, like-minded in many respects, who would join us. Interior BC is also a very conservative place, and maybe Trump would then be able to, get a contiguous pass all the way up to Alaska and to the north and all the minerals and resources and defense that he wants as well. So I think Alberta is in a good spot if we're independent to make a deal, either with Central Canada to renegotiate Confederation or with the United States and to have a good deal with them as well. So, we're sitting on much resources that is needed by the world. And so there's no reason why those can't be used for the profit and good of the citizens in our province and right across our continent.
Mm-hmm. Well, I have a couple more questions that I want to ask you, but we're gonna pause right now for everyone who's listening and say if you want to hear some of those questions, I want to probe your mind, and I guess what's behind it is, and I'll finish off this portion of our time together by saying I appreciated the article that you wrote, but I think what I appreciated about the article ultimately is something that I appreciate about you, which is I think one of the things that we've seen in the last 5 years, especially, is Christians in general, pastors in particular, not living with their head in the sand, but understanding that honoring the Lord, being biblical, also means I really do need to understand what's going on in my country, which means I can't just be a hyper siloed specialist. I need to understand what's happening economically. I need to understand history. I need to understand policy. I need to understand all these various aspects of our culture in order for me to serve my people and for believers in order to be responsible and obey Christ we need to understand the culture. We need to understand politics. We need to know what's going on to speak to it, to address it. And so you you walk that well. And so with that, because you understand, because you're seeking to understand these things, I have some questions for you, but we'll get to that. So for those of you who are watching, if you want to catch the rest of this discussion with Tim, you're going to have to head over to ldcanada.substack.com. It's ldcanada.substack.com. Subscribe, join our mailing list, support the show, and you're going to hear me pick Tim's brain a little bit with some other questions. The article that you wrote can be found at fairviewbaptistchurch.ca. Am I right? fairviewbaptistchurch.ca. The article titled there is The 51st State. There's also another article, we didn't get into it, that you wrote recently as well, Tough Times Ahead for Alberta. So both of those can be found at the website there. And if you're anywhere in the Calgary area and you're looking for a solid church, check out Fairview Baptist. For those who are going to be leaving our discussion now, I just want to say, Tim, thank you so much for joining me on the Dispatch. It is always good to talk with you.
Amen. Thank you.